the alarm buzzed in the early morning darkness, pulling me from a heavy sleep. I rubbed my eyes, staring blankly at the ceiling, thoughts swirling in a familiar rhythm, morning routines, work projects, plans for the weekend. Beside me, Emily lay sleeping, her face relaxed, her breathing soft and even. I took a deep breath, thankful for the simple moments, the quietness of our home before the day's demand swept in. This was my life, and I thought it was a good one. Emily and I had been married for almost 8 years. We weren't the type for grand romantic gestures, but we had our routines, shared jokes, and the steady presence of each other. We had met during college, each fresh-faced and excited to start our careers. She had been studying marketing, and I was already deep into finance courses, always seeing my future through numbers and formulas. Our lives had settled smoothly together, blending seamlessly, so I thought. But lately, things had changed. Emily had grown distant, always rushing to the next thing, a new work event, or plans with friends I didn't know well. I tried to brush it off as her wanting some independence or enjoying her job success. But as the weeks passed, a gnawing feeling settled in my gut. I tried to ignore it, kept telling myself I was being paranoid, that I was imagining things. After all, it wasn't like I was the overly suspicious type. One Friday night, she had plans to go out for drinks with some colleagues. I kissed her goodbye, feeling the familiar pang of her absence before she'd even left. Hours passed, and as midnight crept by, I couldn't ignore the anxiety any longer. I had been expecting her to be home by 10, maybe 11. But here I was, staring at the clock, hoping it would suddenly rewind. Finally, I heard the car pull up. Emily stepped inside, her heels clicking softly against the floor. I could tell right away something was off. She seemed too cheerful, like she'd just been having the best night of her life. "Had a good time?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. She nodded, smiling as she slipped off her shoes. Yeah, it was nice catching up with everyone. But her eyes were distant, her smile a little too bright. I decided to let it go for the night, hoping maybe I was just overthinking it. But the worry gnawed at me. Days turned into weeks, and her nights out became more frequent. Each time, she'd come home later, her energy different, as if she was somewhere else even when she was sitting right beside me. The breaking point came when I was cleaning up around the house one Sunday. I was gathering a few things in the kitchen when her phone buzzed on the counter, a message lighting up the screen. Usually, I wouldn't give her phone a second glance. But this time, something made me pick it up. The message was from someone named Jason, a name I didn't recognize. "Last night was amazing," it read, followed by a heart emoji. I felt a cold wave wash over me, the pieces snapping into place. I scrolled up, my pulse racing as I read through the messages, long, intimate texts, late-night exchanges, inside jokes, and words that were far too personal for any casual friend or colleague. I waited for her to come home that night, my mind buzzing with anger, disbelief, and a sickening sense of betrayal. When she finally walked through the door, I held her gaze, feeling my fists clench at my sides. "Emily," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "Who's Jason?" Her face went pale, and for a moment, she was speechless. But she quickly tried to cover, laughing it off as if it were a joke. "Oh, just someone from work," she said, a hint of nerves in her voice. "We're just friends." "Friends don't send each other texts like that," I replied, my voice growing colder. Her expression shifted, and I could see the gears turning in her mind as she searched for an excuse, a way out. But there was no escape now. I knew the truth. After a few moments of silence, she finally caved, admitting to the affair but downplaying it, insisting it was just a fling, and that it didn't mean anything. I wanted to believe her, but the messages spoke a different story, and the hurt in my chest was too raw, too deep to ignore. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying our conversation, her attempts to explain it all away, her promise that she'd end things with him. But the damage was done. The life I thought we had together was shattered, and there was no putting it back together. The days that followed were a blur. I went through the motions at work, plastering on a smile whenever someone asked if I was okay. I avoided my colleagues' eyes, not wanting them to see the turmoil inside. The betrayal was like a slow poison, seeping into every part of my life, every thought, every moment. I found myself replaying memories, wondering if there had been signs all along that I had missed. Had I been too trusting, too naive to think that we were immune to something like this? One evening, after another long, empty day, I found myself sitting alone in our living room, staring at the wedding photos on the wall. In the pictures, we looked so young, so happy, completely oblivious to the heartbreak that lay ahead. I felt a surge of anger, a bitterness that burned through the sadness. If she thought she could throw our life away so easily, then she'd have to face the consequences. I knew I had to act, to take control of the situation before it ate me alive. Emily thought I would forgive and forget, that I'd just let her keep waltzing in and out of our home like nothing had happened. But I was done being the nice guy. I had been nothing but loyal, supportive, and trusting, and this was how she repaid me. She needed to see that actions have consequences. I began my plan that night, quietly gathering evidence, taking screenshots of every message, every bit of proof I could find. I consulted a lawyer, laying out the situation and learning about my options. It wasn't going to be easy, but I was ready to do whatever it took to reclaim my life and my dignity. Over the next few weeks, I played the part of the loving, unsuspecting husband, giving her enough rope to hang herself. I listened patiently when she promised she'd stop seeing him, pretended to believe her when she said she was working late or out with friends. But inside, I was already miles ahead, preparing for the day I'd finally confront her and make her face the fallout. It was a strange feeling, walking through life with this secret knowledge, this hidden plan. But I knew it was the only way. I was done being the fool, the one who sat quietly by while my wife made a mockery of our marriage. The betrayal had turned me into someone I barely recognized, but I embraced it. A few weeks passed, each day chipping away at the person I had once been. The facade I kept up was exhausting, but I needed her to believe that I had accepted her flimsy apologies, that I was willing to put it behind us. In reality, each interaction with Emily only steeled my resolve. As part of my plan, I started paying close attention to every little thing she did. I tracked her movements, noticed the exact time she came home, the way she'd hurriedly hide her phone whenever I walked into the room. Sometimes, she'd laugh nervously at nothing, lost in her own world, oblivious to the storm building inside me. This wasn't the Emily I thought I knew, but then again, maybe I had never really known her at all. One Saturday afternoon, she mentioned that she was going to visit her mother. She'd used that excuse a few times recently, but this time I decided to test it. As soon as she left, I grabbed my keys, got into my car, and followed her. My heart raced as I trailed her car from a safe distance, feeling a twisted excitement mixed with a lingering pain. If there was any part of me that still wanted to believe she was telling the truth, it was crushed the moment she turned onto a road that definitely didn't lead to her mother's house. I followed her to a neighborhood I didn't recognize. She parked outside a modest-looking apartment complex, got out of the car, and walked briskly toward the door. My chest tightened as I watched her disappear inside. I sat there, stunned and furious. All those lies, she didn't even bother to try and hide it anymore. I waited about 10 minutes before I forced myself to leave, knowing that if I stayed any longer, I might do something I'd regret. On the drive home, I clenched the steering wheel, white-knuckled, my mind racing. I wanted to confront her then and there, to let her know she was exposed. But I knew it wouldn't be enough. She had shattered the life we'd built together, and she needed to feel the full weight of what she had done. That night, I sat alone in the living room, waiting for her to come home. She eventually walked in, smiling as if nothing had happened. I looked at her, feeling both disgusted and strangely detached. "How was your mom?" I asked, my voice sounding almost robotic to my own ears. She hesitated, just for a second, but quickly recovered. "Oh, she's doing fine," she replied with a casual shrug. "You know how she is, always worried about something." She walked past me into the kitchen, humming to herself. Her blatant lies stung. I forced myself to keep my cool, but inside, I felt something snap. This wasn't just an affair, it was a complete betrayal, a calculated effort to undermine everything we had together. And somehow, she thought I'd be clueless forever. I wondered how many times she'd laughed at me behind my back, assuming I'd never find out. I went to bed that night, feeling more determined than ever. The time for subtlety was over, it was time to bring my plan to life. Over the next few days, I quietly moved forward with my preparations. I contacted my lawyer and laid out everything I had learned, every bit of evidence I had gathered. He assured me that I had a strong case, especially given her repeated dishonesty. We discussed my options, each scenario more satisfying than the last. I wanted her to feel the consequences of her actions, to understand the devastation she had caused. Meanwhile, I also started making arrangements for a place of my own. I had found a decent apartment across town, far enough away that I wouldn't have to see her, but close enough to still be involved in the logistics of the split. Each time I signed another form or checked off another item on my list, I felt a small sense of satisfaction. I was taking control back, reclaiming a piece of myself. Finally, everything was in place. I just had to wait for the right moment to make my move. That opportunity came one evening when Emily announced she'd be going out for drinks with her friends. She was trying to sound casual, but I knew better. I nodded, playing along, and watched as she left the house, her phone tucked into her bag. Once she was gone, I got to work. I packed up her belongings, careful to box up every last thing that reminded me of her. I wasn't going to leave a single trace of her in our home. By the time she returned, the house would be as empty as I felt inside. When I finished, I left a note on the kitchen counter, along with the key to a storage unit where I had taken her things. "You made your choice," the note read. "Now you can live with it." It was a short message, but I knew it would say everything she needed to hear. She had betrayed me, broken our trust, and now she'd see what it felt like to be left with nothing. I looked around the empty house one last time, feeling a strange sense of peace. It was over. This chapter of my life was done, and I wasn't going to waste any more of my time on someone who had taken my loyalty for granted. As I locked the door behind me, I didn't feel sadness or regret. Instead, I felt a quiet satisfaction. She had thought she could walk all over me, that I'd stay around no matter what she did. But I was stronger than that, and she was about to learn just how strong I could be. The morning after leaving the note for Emily, I woke up in my new apartment. The unfamiliar walls, the echoing quiet, everything felt surreal. My life, as I had known it, was completely over, yet somehow, I felt lighter. There was a freedom in shedding the weight of her lies, of no longer needing to pretend. Sipping my coffee, I thought about Emily and wondered if she'd seen the note yet. Part of me wanted to imagine the shock on her face when she walked into an empty house, realizing everything was gone, understanding what her choices had cost her. I tried to shake the image, to stop dwelling on it, but I couldn't help feeling satisfied at the thought. For weeks, I'd held back, biting my tongue, letting her live in her fantasy. Now, she'd been brought back to reality, and there was no way she could escape it. Around mid-morning, my phone buzzed. Her name flashed on the screen, and I couldn't help but smirk. It didn't take long. Ignoring her first few calls, I finally picked up, prepared to hear her frantic voice. "Brian," she cried, sounding more panicked than I'd ever heard her. What is all of this? Where are you? The house is empty, and there's just a note. Where are my things?" I let a moment of silence hang in the air, savoring the tension. "I think the note was pretty clear, don't you?" I replied, keeping my tone even. "I've had enough, Emily. You made your choice. You chose Jason, those lies, whatever it is you thought you needed to have outside of our marriage. Well, now you can have it without me." Wait, she stammered, her voice cracking. It was a mistake, Brian." I was confused. "You're overreacting. This doesn't have to end like this." Her words were pathetic, hollow, as if she were grasping at straws. I felt the anger surge again, the memory of those texts, her blatant lies, her sheer nerve to think I'd be here, waiting patiently while she made a fool of me. Overreacting? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. I think you're forgetting who put us here, Emily. You lied to me, betrayed everything we built together, and now you expect me to pretend it didn't happen. She was silent for a moment, and then her tone shifted, like she was trying to reason with me. Brian, I know I messed up. I know that. But can't we work through this? We had a good life together. Think about what we're throwing away. The nerve. We. As if we were both somehow responsible for this mess. I felt the last bit of patience slip away. Emily, you destroyed our marriage the second you let him into your life. You threw this away, not me. I hung up before she could respond, cutting her off in mid-sentence. For a moment, I sat there, breathing heavily, the finality of it all settling over me. This was done. There was no going back. I felt a strange, exhilarating clarity, as if I'd closed the door on a part of my life that had been weighing me down for too long. The next few days were quiet. I spent time settling into my new place, embracing the unfamiliar freedom. I hadn't realized how much I'd been compromising, shrinking myself to fit the life Emily wanted, until I finally had space to breathe. I went out with friends, something I hadn't done in ages. We hit up bars I'd nearly forgotten existed, talked about everything and nothing, and I found myself laughing in a way that felt genuine for the first time in months. But Emily wasn't done. She left messages, pleading voicemails, asking me to talk to her just one more time. Each time, I ignored them, deleting her messages without a second thought. Every call, every voicemail, every text she sent felt like a reminder of everything I was leaving behind. Her words grew more desperate with each passing day, and eventually she showed up at my office, catching me off guard just as I was heading out for lunch. Brian! Her voice was urgent, a mix of panic and anger. I turned to see her standing by the elevators, looking disheveled, her eyes wide and red-rimmed as if she hadn't slept in days. I took a deep breath, barely concealing my annoyance. Emily, this is my workplace. You can't just show up here whenever you feel like it. She ignored the rebuke, her eyes pleading. Brian, please. I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you. But please don't throw this away. Can we try to fix this? Her words sounded rehearsed, as if she'd practiced them before confronting me. I stared at her, feeling nothing but a deep emptiness where my love for her had once been. She looked so small, so desperate, but it didn't move me. All I could see was the person who had looked me in the eye, time and time again, and lied. Emily, you had every chance to be honest with me. Every chance to come clean. But you chose him. You chose your secrets and lies over our life together. Now, you want me to just forget it all? I shook my head, feeling an odd sense of relief as I finally spoke the words I'd been holding back. I deserve better than that, Emily. Her face crumpled, and she looked away, blinking rapidly. I didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't know what I wanted. Then that's on you, I replied, my voice steady. Not me. I'm done, Emily. There's no going back. With that, I stepped around her and headed for the door, leaving her standing there, alone and defeated. I didn't look back. That evening, I returned to my new apartment, feeling the quiet satisfaction of having finally closed that door for good. I felt lighter than I had in years. There would be no more excuses, no more lies, no more pretending. I was free to live the life I deserved, one that wasn't built on secrets and betrayals. Over the next few weeks, I focused on moving forward. I threw myself into my work, reconnected with old friends, and started building the life I wanted. The pain of Emily's betrayal still lingered, but it was fading, replaced by the knowledge that I had done what was right for myself. I was finally free of the weight of her lies, and for the first time in a long time, I was truly at peace. A month had passed since I'd closed the door on my marriage, and life had finally started to settle into a new rhythm. My days were filled with work, friends, and the freedom of my own space. I barely thought about Emily anymore. When I did, it was more of a faint memory than the fresh wound it had once been. I had no regrets, just a quiet sense of closure. One evening, as I sat in my apartment, sipping a beer and scrolling through my messages, I noticed an email from a name I didn't recognize. My finger hovered over the delete button, but something about the subject line caught my attention, a truth you deserve to know. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. The email was from Jason's wife, Hannah. "Hi, Brian. I know we've never met, but I wanted to reach out. I've debated whether to contact you, but there's something you should know about Emily's affair with Jason. I think it will put things into perspective." My heart pounded as I read on. She told me how she had only recently discovered their affair and had been piecing things together ever since. Apparently, she had stumbled across messages between Jason and Emily, the same way I had, and had decided to confront Jason directly. Unlike Emily, however, Jason had broken down and confessed everything. But what Hannah revealed next made my blood run cold. Jason told me that Emily had been the one to pursue him. She had confided in him that she felt unfulfilled in her marriage, that she wanted to experience true passion, her words, not mine. But here's the part that might surprise you: she never actually intended to leave you. According to Jason, she viewed the affair as a way to spice things up and thought she could keep it hidden forever. When she realized you were onto her, she panicked and tried to make it seem less serious than it was. But the truth is, she never planned on stopping. Not unless she got caught. I felt a strange mixture of rage and sick fascination as I read her words. All this time, Emily had been lying to me even more profoundly than I'd realized. It wasn't just an affair, it was a thrill-seeking game to her, a way to satisfy whatever emptiness she felt, all while keeping me as her safety net. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I had thought I knew the extent of her betrayal, but now it felt even deeper, more deliberate. I continued reading. Hannah went on to tell me that she had already filed for divorce from Jason, refusing to play a part in his open marriage fantasy. She told me how she had confronted Emily directly and how Emily, in a last-ditch attempt to salvage her own image, had turned the blame onto Jason, claiming he was the one who'd pushed for the affair, painting herself as the victim of his advances. "She's manipulative, Brian," Hannah wrote. "And if you ever doubted your decision to leave her, please don't. I've seen enough of her messages to know that she's not the person you thought she was. I thought you deserved to know the full story." I closed my laptop, feeling numb. I sat there for a while, staring at nothing, as Hannah's words echoed in my mind. Emily had lied to me, not just once, but over and over, weaving a web of deception that went beyond anything I'd imagined. I had been nothing more than a placeholder for her, a stable anchor while she played out her fantasy. I was furious, but more than that, I was done. She wasn't just selfish, she was a master manipulator who had used me until she was caught. Then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed. A new message from Emily. "Brian, please. Just one last chance to explain everything. I'm begging you. I love you." The nerve. The absolute nerve. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. I had to make sure she knew she was exposed, that I saw her for what she really was. I replied to her message, my fingers tapping furiously across the screen. "I got an interesting email from Jason's wife tonight, Emily. I know everything. I know that you never planned to stop. I know you were just keeping me around as a backup. So don't bother explaining. I've heard enough." I hit send, feeling a surge of satisfaction. For a moment, I waited, half expecting her to respond with excuses, with desperate pleas. But instead, my phone buzzed with another notification, not from Emily, but from my bank. Balance transfer of $25,000 completed. My heart skipped a beat. That was the majority of my savings, money I had been setting aside for the future, for security after the divorce. I opened the banking app, hoping it was some kind of mistake, but it was all there in black and white. Emily had drained the account in one transaction, taking almost every penny. I sat back, stunned. I had underestimated her, and I'd paid for it, literally. She had lost everything, me, the life we'd built, and in one final act of revenge, she had taken the last thing she could get her hands on. My stomach twisted with anger and frustration, knowing that she'd found a way to hit me where it hurt. I called my bank, frantic, but it was no use. Since her name had still been on the account, the transaction was legitimate. All I could do was freeze what little funds were left and start the long, grueling process of filing fraud claims. I felt sick as the reality sank in. She had won, in her twisted way. She had taken everything, right down to the last cent. The next morning, I awoke feeling drained, hollowed out by the previous night's events. But as I stared at the ceiling, I realized something unexpected. I was free. She had taken my money, but she couldn't take my peace of mind, my self-respect, my future. I had lost everything that was tied to her, but that only meant I had nothing left to lose. With a grim smile, I climbed out of bed, ready to rebuild from the ashes of what she'd tried to destroy. I would earn that money back, rebuild my life without her shadow darkening it. She'd taken her last piece, but in doing so, she'd freed me from any lingering doubts, any hesitation to close the door on that chapter of my life forever. Emily could have her lies, her twisted games, her hollow victories. I had something she could never touch, a life without her. And as I stepped out of my apartment into the morning sunlight, I knew it was a life I would reclaim, one day, one step at a time.